Osrith's persistent scouring of the dark sand beyond the wide, open lock paid off a week after Domhnall's meeting. Before dawn, Osrith would rise, a lump in her throat at the anticipation of finding Betha, the jumble of words in her mind about her body and its differences spinning round through her kind as she scrambled through her duties in the kitchen, collecting water from the well, lighting a fire, preparing the day's vegetables, then walk quickly the few miles to the coast. Domhnall would always be up, a more disciplined prince altogether, as he drilled his troops, mind more focused since his meeting with Domhnall, red hands holding the cross standing out for miles, even as far as the ridge over which Osrith must pass in order to descend into the shallow scooping of the loch's bay. That she would have joined him, Osrith had considered it. Yet he was still not above silly pranks. Only 3 nights before, when all of her bedding from the ledge in the tiny room at the back of the kitchen had vanished, only to mysteriously reappear after a wasted hour's search for it. And, she had a pressing matter to attend to each morning, that was, to search for the heathen healer. 2 moons had passed, so each morning the strength of her hope faded that she would ever see the heathen again, but this morning, a bright, cool September Monday, Betha's black-haired, russet-clothed figure contrasted easily against the blue-green of the rising tide. Beside her, little Finn scampered, picking up ribbons of knob-burly seaweed with joy, before placing them in his mother's basket. As Osrith approached, Betha gave a little start, as if to flee, but then on recognizing Osrith, stood still, waiting for her to approach, long black hair moving in the morning breeze. "Good morning," Osrith said, then stopped, when the woman did not return her smile. "You sold me lily root," Osrith reminded the heathen woman, "in the late springtime." "You stole our squid," the woman returned. "I do remember you. Warrior girl ... Saxon." She spat the last word, folding her arms. Osrith frowned. Is that what the heathen woman thought? She turned to go, then remembered why she was there. "The squid were no more mine as yours," she replied, coolly. "I came, as you asked, 2 moons later, and you were not here. I have come most mornings." "We do not recognize agreements with Christians," Betha retorted. "This land, on which we have moved for the longest time, we are being forced from. It is no more theirs as ours." Osrith frowned, trying to work out the riddle. From the heathen's point of view, her mother had once told her, land to the heathen belonged to the gods. There was little sense of property, only territory presided over by leaders and those with knowledge of hunting, healing, cooking, ceremonies and so on. Who had taken their land? Norse? Danes? Osrith asked. Gales. Betha handed her basket to Finn, who was sheltering behind his mother. "The Norse do not force their beliefs onto us, nor will us to give up our beliefs, or ways. We are more alike than we are different. They want land, we merely pass over it. But the Gales..." The woman, her ire of ferment, narrowed her eyes to Osrith then turned on her heel. "But... and you are no better, Saxon girl, for it is the same intolerance that burned my family." Osrith watched as the woman turned to go, scooping up her son. "Your family ... burned? All the way back to the ancient days, all the way back to the first peoples." Betha glared at Osrith, before stalking back through the footprints she had made in the damp sand. "The first peoples?" Osrith had a vague idea the woman meant their dead, for pagans kept the dead together in one place. The only time they claimed land, of sorts. Osrith had seen such a grave setting in Pitland, where the heathen would take offerings and wood, chipped with lines of various lengths, a language of some kind, old, ancient. Ogam, it was called, by the monks. And High King Flann had been determinedly purging all pagan sites, groves, burial chambers, spinneys of trees in order to embed Christianity amongst every person on the island of Irian. Perhaps men had destroyed Betha's family graves? "Can I help?" Osrith called after her. "I am no Gael. I am called Lackland." Betha stopped her fierce striding and turned. "You are not a Gael, but you mimic them. I have seen you, running, guiding, fighting. From wherever you came, you are using them for shelter. That makes you no better." She looked up and down Osrith's body. "I can fight for you," Osrith declared. "I can protect your family." But Betha shook her head, her thick black hair tossed in the coastal breeze, so it followed behind her like a storm cloud. "You came here because you want something from me, Lackland," Betha said, warningly. "Yes." Osrith lowered her head, as humbly as she could. "Yes, I do. I need your help." From her jerkin she pulled out the last of her silver, holding it out to the heathen woman, whose eyes flashed at the rarity. Then, she reached down to the basket, pulling out a linen packet, soft and motile. "Here is a balm made, it is of terebinth, from a very distant land, and honey. This will soothe your injuries. It will make your flesh strong again." And she looked at Osrith again, not at her face, but extended a hand, looking at her stomach. "Have you felt the quickening?" "Quickening?" Osrith stumbled over the word. "Here." Movement. Betha looked down to her hand, as if her palm would induce this quickening. "Do you not know? A woman is not considered to be with child until she declared she has felt the quickening. It is the child gaining its soul." And when Osrith didn't answer, Betha asked, "Have you felt a quickening?" "I am not with child, I am a warrior," Osrith protested. "Do you have your bleedings?" Osrith stopped, thinking. It had been several months since she had sought the leaves to pack inside herself. Not for some months. "You grow a child, landless warrior." Osrith felt her mouth fall open. "I cannot, I have to be, Iona, dull rioter, Pitland," and her role by Domhnall's side flashed into her mind. "But, you are," the healer said. "The quickening ... have you felt ... movement?" Osrith shook her head. "Then, should you not wish to be with child, then take these." Over Osrith's hand the woman held a tangle of yellow flowers and root. "Tansy? But it is a terrible way to be without a child. Though they do it for selfish reasons, your Christian nuns and monks have the best route to childlessness." Osrith touched her fingers to the flower, then withdrew her hand, looking at the woman, who was about to turn away. "Why do this, when you would not wait for me, as you agreed?" The woman shrugged. "We can never trust Christians. They worm and twist until their religion destroys our own. And you," Betha looked appraisingly at Osrith, "you want to be more than a woman, you would be a man." She shook her head, looking at Osrith's face. "Motherhood would not suit you, indeed." Osrith's mind drifted, like the light, autumn clouds far above her, to the boy born to the servant girl and her revulsion at the birth, how Ailey had nearly died, as did her baby. What a risk to take. Her eyes moved to Betha's face, sharp, clever features with the knowing that she would come to recognize in all pagan healers. And maybe she was wrong. Yet the heathen woman was definite about her being with child. Osrith extended her hand towards the tansy, holding in the other the silver. Betha swiped the piece, thrusting the tansy root towards her. "You must take it soon, before the child comes into its soul," the woman warned. "It is more a curse than a gift. You must take it soon, or the child will have begun to shoot from the germ taking hold inside you. At that time, you will be risking your life to remove it." Then, as Osrith made to push the tansy into her hand, Betha gripped her wrist. "In exchange, you will leave their company, go on the path you so desperately desire to tread, leave these people." "I want to," ventured Osrith, earnestly, the thought that she was with child roaming wildly in her head. "Then do it," Betha shouted, as Finn shrunk into her skirt. "To be a woman, you must work twice as hard as a man to be equal, and more so to triumph. You cannot have attachments if this is the path you choose, if you want to succeed. And you must bear the defeats with more strength than a man does." Osrith shivered and the woman loosed her grip. "And yes, if you cannot choose chastity, the risk of a child will be your penalty." She pushed her hand deep within her red-brown cloak, securing the last of Osrith's silver, shaking her head as Osrith examined the tansy. "Take it in a morning, steep it in hot water, then drink it when it has cooled, drink it all down. It will be painful, but quick." And, before Osrith could ask more of the heathen woman, Betha was gone, Finn in her wake, looking over his shoulder every so often as they pressed bare footprints into the sun-bathed sand. 88,888,888. Osrith did not make any decisions immediately based on the healer's words. She continued to work in the kitchens, and when she was required, took the children to the monastery for their education. Things felt normal, as if she were back at Dunnottar, a royal palace running to order in partnership with the monastery. Even now, as September eased by, the stores of grain and salted meat began to grow, just like harvest would around Dunnottar, or Glashk or Bibbenberg. Yet her mind would not forget Betha, her anger at the desecration of her ancestors, and the land that supported her people. But, it was happening throughout Irian, throughout Alba and Northumbria, too. Welles was a pagan country melded to the oldest Christianity, and their ways, worship of water and hills and sun were testament to that. How much of the old Brittonic life would survive now the Gaels and the Saxons doubled down in their efforts to eradicate it, to become more pious in the eyes of God, in the hope he would grant favor in battle over the Danes. Often, when she had a quiet moment between taking the children and her tasks, Osrith would remember the tansy root and flower, and she would clasp them, thinking of that healer's words, break away from the Gaels, follow your own path. You are here very early, or too late, he added. Did you get locked in? Osrith took a step towards him, closing her hand tightly around the tansy. Then, he saw a manuscript with a map on it. Someone else must have been using it, and had not put it away. It was a map of the English kingdoms. I wished to learn I could about them, Osrith said, trying to sound vague as Andra scooped up the parchment and returned it its correct place. I didn't think it would hurt, as we are due here after dawn. Be careful. If the abbot had found you, he would have had you whipped. These are valuable and rare. Osrith watched him as he continued to his job, which consisted of filling pots with water from a bucket he had brought in with him, before putting them next to the quills on the scholars' desks. You are good with your scholars, said, conversationally. For a warrior. Warriors can be learned, Osrith replied, mildly, thinking about how to leave without drawing too much attention to herself. If Andra was awake, others would be too. She edged towards the cloister. I thought a monastery never slept, anyway, she added, repeating the young monk's words that he had told them all, proudly, a few days before. Yes, he rallied, eyeing Tag's sword in her belt. Have you always wanted to be a warrior? Not always, Osrith conceded, just a few more steps and she would be at the door. She could get to the guard room and across the courtyard, past Domhnall and his troops and into the door at the back of the kitchen. Why a warrior? I couldn't think to be anything else. It feels like I was meant to be one. That is like being a monk, but without the sword, he added, chuckling. Trials of food, comfort, shelter, chastity, we all get closer to him. Andrew was making his way back towards her now, filling more cups, before taking the water bucket and throwing it through the window, making the muddy courtyard even muddier. And what happens when you are closer? Osrith asked, listening. Andrew turned to her, brightly, his voice full of joy. You hear? His words so clearly, like the sun shining through your very soul. Not the sun, Andrew frowned, no, something much stronger. He looked at Osrith. It is exhilarating, fighting for your lord, Osrith replied, matching Andrew's ebullience. War makes me forget any pain it causes. Doubts vanish, and I am alone, with God, doing his will. She shifted her feet. Then, a little calmer, asked, did you always want to be a monk? Me? Andra asked. I wanted to be a farmer, like my father. But, the monastery sought more apprentices because of the raids from the north some years ago. Out of all the boys in my village, I was chosen to be educated, and to be a monk. He glanced to the floor. It wasn't long after that my village was sacked by Norse. My family were killed. Mine too, lied Osrith, readying to trot out the worn-out story. I was on pilgrimage with my family. We were at Culdees, in Pitland. Norse came and murdered the pilgrims, and a great deal of the monks. But, it was outside Dunnota. King was waiting with his army. I saved Constantine's life. The prince? Osrith nodded, as Andra recommenced his job of furnishing the table with objects. This time, he was putting new candles into the holders. Though tallow, new candles drew the soot up towards the ceiling and away from the manuscripts they were writing. I would have had to fight, if King Findlaith had called me to, if I were a farmer. But I would not choose it. You? Did you want to be a monk? Women have to be nuns, don't they? Osrith asked. Or abbesses? In what way are they different? Or do they do the same as monks? Andra lowered the candle in his hand, thinking on her words. Only monks can touch the words of God, he said, slowly, stepping towards Osrith, a confused expression on his face. Why? I have been touching them, for months. But you're a... He frowned, confusion etched around his eyes. You're a... I'm a girl, Osrith confirmed. In body, not in soul, not in spirit. I am a warrior. She waited for Andra to continue to work, but he was staring at her. A girl. Osrith nodded. You have teats? He approached Osrith, amused, his hand outstretched, disbelievingly, then, seeing the look on Osrith's face, withdrew it, his face clouding, then jabbing a finger. You? Women's teats feed the devil. Are all babies devils, then? Osrith asked, thinking of Alia, the serving girl, who was probably lying next to hers, allowing her nipple into her son's little mouth, giving him life-giving sustenance. For that is all there is, a way to feed a child. Then, she peeled off her tunic, seized his hand and put it firmly onto her left breast. It is a mound, a teat, to nourish young. You might say that a sow suckles the devil, or a mare. Andra's hand was cold, and he stared at his hand, as if it was itself bedeviled. Then, as moisture seeped between his fingers, he drew it back, as if it was cursed. They do that? Osrith thought, as she stared at him, moisture dripping down her chest. Do all women's breasts expel milk as they grow? It seemed wasteful, if not for a babe. And the ghost of a thought haunted the corners of her mind, was the heathen woman right? A small cry escaped Andra's lips, and Osrith's thoughts evaporated as she looked at him urgently. But, though he willed it, Andra's face betrayed ... not horror, no. Osrith was trying to work out what the young monk, only a little older than her, was feeling when he drew up his cassock. From his groin, a tentative erection sprang, as if afraid, shy. Osrith tried not to laugh at Andra's arousal, before grasping it in her hand, working him up and down, pulling back his foreskin a little before drawing it over the ever-growing heat and dampness of the tip. Inevitably, a groan came from the young monk's mouth as Osrith wanked him, until Andra had decorated the tiled monastery floor with his ejaculate, his cock curling back in on itself as its hardness melted. He looked at Osrith wide-eyed, darting to her face, and then to the floor, as if disbelieving what had just happened. You can do it yourself, too, Osrith whispered, putting her tunic and jerkin back on. I have, Andra confessed, looking into Osrith's face. But it has never felt like that. Then, he gave her a smile, as if grateful, turned to go, then trod back hastily to her, seizing her lips with his own, pressing an urgent kiss to hers before dashing away. Corrupting the monks, that could be the next charge she could face, Osrith thought, as she let herself out into the courtyard, the thump of Domhnall's troops keeping rhythm, her mind thinking of the joy coursing through that young man's body. Women's bodies could feel like that, Osrith had once been told, by one of the older servants, but a man had to take his time. And when did men ever do that? Osrith hurried through the dark, musty kitchen to her own bed, wondering what Andra would say to her tomorrow, when he let them into the chapter house. But, little did she know, and little still the monastery, that a Norse raid would see the end of Andra and so many of the scribes, as they mounted an attack on the palace. But Osrith's thoughts were not with war, but of the tansy secreted in her clothes, that she must use if Beether was right and she truly was with child, be ready to do away with it, depart to Alba and find Utad. 88,888,888. The day began as usual with matins sung, filtering through the palace's doors and windows. As usual, Osrith collected the children, walking across the courtyard to the monastery. As usual, they were met at the door by novice monk Andra, who greeted the school and ushered them through the cloister to the manuscript room, unusually not meeting Osrith's eye. She was too tired to think about what they had done a few hours earlier, though the solidified evidence of his desire was still there, on the wooden floor. Instead, she helped Malcolm kneel up onto the higher chairs as Mary brought over the letters they were to copy out that morning. Osrith watched as Andrew pushed his way hurriedly through into the church, making a mental note to find him at another time to talk about what they had done, but he was pushed to one side as an older monk burst through, shouting quickly in Gaelish, too quickly for Osrith. But the room, which had been slowly filling with scribes, was now in disarray. Another monk, the abbot's deputy, ushered them out, and called to the princesses too, who were standing close to the young princes, hands together. "What is the matter?" Osrith asked Mary, as they, too, hurried through into the monastery. The door which led to the foyles bank was open, and the monks poured through it, out into the daylight. Osrith pushed her way through, then froze. On the ridge, in line blocking the path to Loch Foyle, Norsemen stood, one long line of them, their brightly painted shields in one hand and their swords, axes and cudgels in the other. Just standing. The monks had stopped themselves, out of fear, perhaps, or of confusion. The Northmen were doing nothing. But, it was clear what they were about to do. The Norse and Danes in the area, Osrith knew, were kin of Guthrum, who had been defeated at Ethandun, a battle that was rarely out of Osrath's mind, for it pinned Utah at a definite time and place, a target. As part of the peace, Guthrum was baptized, with Alfred as his godfather and, as King Ethelstan, Guthrum was now king of East Anglia. Alfred had secured his kingdom, and pacified the Danes by demarking the Saxon kingdoms. A lone bang of weapon on oak shield brought Osrith back to the present. The monks, ranging in front of their doors, were looking out onto the ridge, searching for the origin of the noise. Next to her, the children started as the noise came again. Neil buried his head into Ira's dress. Mary took the other two boys' hands in hers. Both Maldub and Malduin looked terrified, as did Gormlaith, though she was fighting hard not to show it. Yet her tall, thin frame quivered. They mustn't be here, Osrith decided, and strode back into the monastery as ironware was passed between the monks. It was clear they were going to make their stand. "Get the warriors!" Osrith shouted, to the nearest monk, who stared at them all, that they were there. "There is no time. Get what weapons you can, take anything sharp if you don't have enough." An image of that cold day, when she was feigning Constantine's identity, appeared. "They will expect you to charge at once," Osrith told the monk, who was now focusing on the Northmen. "Go in row, take your time, do not let them surround you, do not let them drive you towards the river." The monk looked at Osrith again, his thick, black eyebrows folded into a confused V. The bang came again, and this time, Gormlaith screamed. Both Mary and Ira were trembling and the boys looked too terrified to make any sound at all. Tell them all," Osrith said, as the words of the Lord's Prayer in Latin drifted over the monastic heads like autumn mist. Then, beginning the prayer, but in the Gaelish tongue, Osrith led the children across the church and out through the guardroom door. The courtyard was just in front of them. What she needed was for the children to go in an orderly manner, else their panic would encraft the Norse to raid the palace earlier than they might, and the warriors would not be ready. She looked across the courtyard, spying that the kitchen doors were open. The slaves, busy with their morning tasks, had stopped. If there were to be a raid, slaves were usually taken, for their value in labor, and they might get a better deal slavebook for a new master. Not that they had any choice about it. But the Norse did not, as Betha had said, force paganism onto people like the Gaels did with Christianity. If any of the slaves were pagan, or worshipped different gods, the Norse would not care. "Gormlaith," Osrith spoke calmly to the older girl, who moved her long neck and looked at her. Osrith pointed to the kitchens. Take the children, carry Maldub and Dira." The dark-haired princess looked to Osrith, her pale eyes looking older. "Somehow, you carry Maldu in. Mary must keep Neil in hand. Walk slowly back to the palace and hide in the cellars. Lock yourselves in if necessary." Then Osrith bent her head and whispered close to Mary's ear, "For they will take as slaves who they can, and ravage and kill those they can't, then burn down the palace and monastery." Mary jerked her head to look at Osrith, alarm in her eyes, but she said nothing. "If you are locked in, and there is a fire, that stone room where the food and ale is kept will protect you, until the Norse have left, at the very least." The girl nodded, gravely. None of Osrith's meaning was lost on the princess, and she suddenly felt proud of the younger girl, who turned and straightened her dress, before straightening Neil's clothes and brushing off any dirt, always a difficult job with Neil, just as if they were about to go into church. "Walk as if you are in prayer," and Osrith turned at the crunch underfoot of leaves behind her. It was Indra, a sharp scribe staff in his hand, usually used for pointing out the letters in a manuscript. He was going to use that. Osrith scorned silently. He looked at Osrith, a slight pink to his cheeks, and was about to speak, when Osrith laid a hand on his arm. He looked at it, then back to her. "Did you hear what I told the children?" He nodded. "So," Osrith concluded, "Indra will lead you to the kitchens, you will follow behind him as if you are in Sunday progress in the monastery church." "And after we get dinner?" asked Neil, his clean-on-today breeches already filthy at the knees. "Dinner, for good boys who can walk in prayer," Osrith laughed, trying to make light of it all. Balachmuth. Then, Osrith turned back to Indra. He was still holding his slave stick, looking at Osrith fixedly. "What is needed is for them to walk," Osrith said, as if they have just learned from the scriptures a most rapturous thing, silently, and with reverence. She leaned close to Indra, her warm breath on his ear. "One scream and the game is up." She pointed back to the library room. "Take your parchments if you must. In fact, even better, carry them so the boys can see you with them, as the abbot does." A minute passed as the group assembled, although for Osrith it seemed like an hour. The battle noise was rising, though no one would be fighting yet. The noise made by the Norse, loud and fierce rhythmical banging on their shields, would be enough to terrify most of the monks. And yet, now, a song was being sung, low, persistent, like a battle horn of war. The holy men were singing together, and it sounded as terrifying as the Norse's beating. And, once they were away, Osrith withdrew the sword Tagd had given her, found her battle stance, shifting the blade in her grip, before walking back through the monastic church of St. Comsil as the monks charged up the hill.